Good evening. My name is Robin Godfrey, and I'm the Executive Director of GALA Choruses. Thanks for joining us tonight for a live reading and conversation with Rita Kissen, author of Strong Voices, The Story of the Women's Chorus Movement. Rita is a former singer with Women in Harmony and is active within the Sister Singers Network. Rita, tell us about what you're going to share with us this evening.
I'm going to be mostly reading from the book and spending some time on how I got into this topic in the first place, and then giving you a sense of where women's choruses came from and how they have been together, what they've done in our own time, and then mostly focus on Sister Singers Network, the premier women's chorus network in the United States, and tell you about how Sister Singers came out of the women's music movement and the lesbian feminist identity movement, and then move on to some contemporary social and political challenges and how women's choruses have met them.
Sounds terrific. Well, very good. Why don't you take us off into the world of the women's chorus movement?
I would be delighted to. The story of women's choruses is a story of how, go back one please, is a story of how a coalition of singers that began as a mostly separatist musical home for the lesbian community grew into an inclusive network welcoming women of all sexual and gender orientations and singing for social justice in the wider world. I'm going to just ask my tech assistant to go back to that first slide. Thank you. 30 years ago, women's choruses were among the few places where lesbians felt free to be themselves. In the words of one singer who had just come out in her school district, the place to breathe. Though LGBT people have become more visible in American society, women continue to find their authentic voices in feminist choruses. My own relationship with women's choruses began when I joined Women in Harmony in Portland, Maine, shortly after retiring from 35 years of teaching English, women's studies, and teacher education. From the moment I joined the Second Sopranos, in the communal back rub that began every Women in Harmony rehearsal, I realized that there was something about this community that was different from any other group I had ever belonged to. When I discovered that we were part of a larger network that shared our mission of singing together for social justice, the scholar researcher in me wondered why those 2 hours every week could foster a community unlike any other, while my activist side wanted to understand the place of this unique choral network in the feminist and LGBT movements of which I was a part. Strong Voices has taken me on a long journey from conversations with members of my home chorus in Portland to an emotional choral reunion in Houston, Texas, to warm and welcoming gatherings in Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, and my home state of Colorado. These strong voices remind me of the mission statement of the network's oldest chorus, Anna Cruz's. Quote, "We sing to celebrate the diversity of women's lives and culture, to open hearts and minds, and to struggle together for a just and compassionate world." Studying contemporary feminist choruses led me back to earlier women's choral communities, ranging from the anonymous drummers depicted on the ancient terracottas to Miriam in the Hebrew Bible, from the Parthenaea girls' choruses of ancient Greece to the medieval nuns singing under the leadership of Hildegard von Bingen, and from the orphan girls of the 18th century Venetian Pietà, for whom Antonio Vivaldi composed some of his most glorious choral music, to Johannes Brahms' Frauenchor in 1850s Hamburg. Feminist singer-activists still debate the nature and degree of the power enjoyed by these women. Some argue that women working together in groups have greater opportunities for enhanced status than women without such ties, and that the religious function of women's choral singing in the ancient world exerted a form of social control. Others remind us that no matter how transformative choral singing may have been for individual singers or choruses. Their power did not translate into the wider world of patriarchal societies or transform those societies from patriarchy to something else. Turning to more recent history, Chapter 2 explores choral singing in 19th and 20th century immigrant communities, in labor communities, and in civil rights struggles, and the part women played in those choruses and those movements. Along with this history, the people's music continues the exploration of the relationship between music and power and the role of singing in social and political change. Songs were an essential part of the women's suffrage movement and the women's club movement, which began as a vehicle for socializing but grew more political at the turn of the 20th century as women became more involved in campaigns for social and civic reform. Black women, excluded from white women's clubs, formed women's clubs of their own, which focused on a wide range of social, political, and economic reforms, as well as the anti-lynching campaign spearheaded by the pioneer journalist Ida B. Wells. Black women also found a sense of self-worth in the Black church, which became their spiritual, social, and above all, musical home. Numerous accounts testify to the power of singing to inspire, connect, and fortify Black and white activists in the civil rights movement as they marched, rallied, and endured beatings, jailings, and the threat of death. Among those who sang was Bernice Johnson Reagan, who had come to Washington, D.C. to pursue a graduate degree at Howard University. In 1971, Reagan gathered 10 women singers to form a group that would become Sweet Honey in the Rock. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thanks. That's their first album. Drawing on the African American gospel and spiritual tradition, singing of oppression, liberation, and solidarity, Sweet Honey at first seemed peripheral to the women's movement that was happening all around them, so much of which was concerned with white middle-class women. But then Reagan learned of Joanne Little, a Black woman who had killed her jailer during a forced rape in a North Carolina prison, escaped from jail, and become the target of a dead or alive warrant issued for her capture. The result was Joanne Little, a song included on Sweet Honey's first album. Reagan wrote, "Opening myself up to Joanne Little's struggle, as I let women who fell, women who were abused by their husbands, women whom I saw every day, things immediately got softer for me, and I could breathe with less clenched teeth. It might have saved my very life, this letting broken women into my world. It meant that Sweet Honey would not test women at the door as to what we were carrying. We assumed that if you were grown, Black, and female, you were carrying a load." Before long, Sweet Honey in the Rock was drawing enthusiastic audiences that crossed lines of race, gender, and sexual orientation. For Black women, Sweet Honey concerts were a powerful reflection of themselves and their history. Poet and novelist Alice Walker wrote, "These songs said, we do not come from people who have had nothing. We come rather from people who've had everything, except money, except political power, except freedom. We understand at last, listening to Sweet Honey, what our freedom songs are for. They show us the way home, which is the whole earth." Although the folk and protest singers of the 1950s and 60s challenged racial and economic oppression, their songs reflected conventional ideas about women, while the folk movement itself continued to be dominated by men. But as women struggled with the complexities of identity and activism, they were building a women's music movement that would change all that. Many years later, looking back on the first 20 years of women's music, Tony Armstrong Jr., editor of the feminist newsletters Hot Wire and Paid My Dues, wrote that in the 1970s, the feminist and lesbian movements married each other, and their most beautiful and powerful daughter was named Women's Music and Culture. Next slide, please. Here we are in the world of lesbian identity. In 1973, a collective of 5 women who called themselves the Furies founded Olivia Records. Their first full-length LP was Meg Christian's debut album, I Know You Know. Next slide, please. And the second Olivia release, Chris Williamson's The Changer and the Change, sold over 250,000 copies in the next 12 years to become one of the biggest selling independent records of all time. Following the success of The Changer and the Change, a wide array of performers recorded on Olivia, including many from the Black music community. In 1975, Linda Tillery and Mary Watkins joined Olivia, and together with blues singer Gwen Avery and poet Pat Parker, they launched the Olivia-sponsored tour, Varied Voices of Black Women. Gradually, Olivia became an arena where Black and white women worked together, fostering collaborations through music that often eluded the lesbian community on other fronts. Next slide, please. In 1977, Olivia faced a major crisis when Sandy Stone, a trans woman and Olivia sound engineer, was outed by name in Janice Raymond's book, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male. Stone and Olivia began to receive hate mail that included threats to the collective and death threats to Stone. The Olivia Collective responded with a fierce defense of Stone as, quote, a person, not an issue. Sandy is faced with the same kind of oppression that other women and lesbians face. She must also cope with the ostracism and oppression that all society imposes on the transsexual. Olivia's understanding of transgender identity as a form of oppression stands out as virtually unique in 1970s identity politics. Not until the 21st century would trans activism gain widespread support in the LGBTQ community. Meanwhile, women who had been singing along with Meg and Chris and finding one another at women's concerts were coming together in choruses that reflected their lives and their identities. In 1975, Kathy Roma, a peace activist who had begun to identify as a lesbian and had discovered the world of women's music, founded Anna Crucis, the first contemporary feminist chorus. She later wrote, when I started Anna, there was an importance to me to speak of all kinds of issues because I come out of the anti-war, labor, peace, and justice movements and civil rights movement. The fomenting of all these movements coming together in the 60s, including gay and lesbian liberation, made for a pretty amazing consciousness. In 1974, Kristen Lems, a young Champaign folk singer, and her sister approached the organizers of a local folk festival and asked why they were not seeking women performers. She said, I went in there and said to them, how could you have a festival that is all male? This is inconceivable to us. And they said there just weren't any women good enough. My sister and I were so outraged. What do you mean not good enough? We put an ad in the paper that said, no women good enough? Come and audition for our Women's Folk Festival. Next slide. The Women's Folk Festival that Lems and her sister organized on the same night as the Men's Festival drew an overflow crowd. She and her sister went on to organize the first National Women's Music Festival at the University of Illinois, where 800 women from all over the United States gathered to see and hear women performers and to share their own music and their lives. 2 years after the first National Women's Music Festival, Lisa Vogel and her sister Christy, along with their friend Mary Kindig, drew up a plan for a festival of their own in Central Michigan. People said, you're nuts, you know, we're in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. What we've done is thrown 1 or 2 good keggers, Vogel recalled. We literally had a party at our house, stopped the music and passed the hat. We had no money. When they approached the organizers of the National Women's Music Festival, she said, we went in with a hand-drawn ditto master that we had snuck in the university and done, you know, with the little purple ink. Some of us can remember that. Some of us probably don't. And all the other producers who at that point were taking themselves very seriously were going, wait a minute, you're doing this big thing that we're all talking about? What's up with those ditto masters? The Champaign women decided to take a chance on Vogel's plan. And in 1976, the first Michigan Women's Music Festival was held in the central Michigan college town of Mount Pleasant. 2,000 women came for 3 days and nights of performances held on one main stage. The following year, the festival moved to rural western Michigan, where it was produced, staffed, and run entirely by women until it came to an end in 2015. Other festivals followed, and before long, women's music festivals became the places, as one commentator said, where the heart and soul of the movement came most alive. Many years later, Kathy Romer recalled those times. Imagine the year is 1972. There are no cell phones, no internet, no voicemail or answering machines, yet a network of women across the nation hooked up via sheer will. Women wanting to sing their lives, women writing lyrics expressing the emotion and experience of their everyday lives, women performing for one another, producing concerts, doing all skilled and technical jobs, including lights and sound, recording, learning to play instruments usually considered masculine, traps, trumpet, bass, electric guitar, saxophone, etc., all coalesced around this thing called women's music. Next slide, please. In 1980, Linda Ray, who was known as Echo, and Linda Small were among a group of singers at the Michigan Women's Music Festival who compiled a list of women's choruses from around the country that they called sister singers. We had no way to duplicate it there because that was a rural setting, so we drug it home, Echo later recalled. We said, we need a logo or something, or they won't think it's real, as if it were. So some people in our choir came up with a logo, put it on a letterhead, made a bunch of copies, typed up the letter, and said, send it out. And I just want to comment on this slide. This is a photo of the original mailing list that they passed around at the Michigan Women's Music Festival. It's one of a wonderful Sister Singers collection at the Sophia Smith collection at Smith College. And it's right there. It's on yellow lined paper, and that was what they did. By 1984, Sister Singers had grown to 6 choruses with 70 singers, and the network was ready for a wider audience. Next slide, please. The first National Women's Chorus Concert drew 130 women from 7 choruses in Kansas City, Missouri, to sing women's music favorites, folk song, and a setting of On Children by Khalil Gibran that remains a network favorite. As the movement grew, choruses faced issues of lesbian visibility, as well as race, racism, and accessibility. Not all choruses included the word lesbian in their title. In fact, most did not. But from the beginning, women's choruses were a safe place for lesbians, closeted or out. For many, singing in a feminist chorus was an important step on the road to becoming fully visible. A singer in the Phoenix Women's Chorus, formerly Arizona Women in Tune, recalled, I was just coming out. I was raising my kids by myself. I had been divorced for years and I had no idea how to find lesbians anywhere except in bars. Just before a concert, she noticed the organist from her church sitting in the audience. I had not come out to her, and I was sitting there, and we were going to get up and sing. I thought, oh my gosh, I have to run up to her. I have to come out to them before I'm on stage. So I went running up to her and I said, okay, Rose, I'm here because I'm coming. I'm out, I'm lesbian or something. And she went, oh, that's wonderful, and gave me a big hug. Christina Borger was feeling tired and burned out when she decided to move from political activism to musical activism. In 1990, she posted a flyer in downtown Champaign-Urbana that read, Creative Women Take Note, inviting interested women to help form a new chorus. I spelled women with a Y, that is W-O-M-Y-N, some of you will remember that, which is a clue that lesbians should look at it. I showed up and I waited to see who else would walk through the door. I was afraid nobody would show. Of course I was. Despite Berger's apprehensions, a room full of women showed up, ranging in age from 12 to 50 and varying widely in singing experience. Berger named the chorus Amazon, Champaign-Urbana's premier lesbian feminist chorus, explaining there's lesbian feminism with a hyphen, which refers to women who are lesbian and feminist. But if you put a diagonal slash, if you put a diagonal slash between the words, then it means either or. It doesn't mean you have to be both to get in the choir. It means you've got to be one or the other. Next slide. I guess that's code switching, huh? When she founded Resonance Chorus in Boulder, Colorado, Sue Coffey wanted lesbian identity to be, as she said, a non-issue, but it has to be an articulated non-issue instead of an invisible non-issue. There's a big difference. I give the lesbian speech every year, which we all agree is funny but helpfully straightforward. This is the women's chorus, and there are a lot of lesbians in the chorus. That's the nutshell. And then there's a bit of elaboration, which informs the culture, the humor, the messages, and the kinds of outreach we do. Singers need to be fine with this, or it wouldn't be the right chorus for them. Sue says, I also talk about the roots of the chorus in the GLBTQ choral movement and the women's music community, and tell the singers that we didn't invent ourselves. We wouldn't exist as this community-rich, intentional, relevant chorus without the inspiration of GALA and Sister Singers networks and the singer-songwriters of the women's music movement. Like the mainstream women's movement and the women's music movement from which they sprang, early women's choruses were overwhelmingly white. Building choral partnerships across lines of race and ethnicity proved far more complicated and painful than many women anticipated. Nevertheless, identity conflicts and struggles over racism did not tear the network apart, as happened in so many other lesbian feminist groups in the 70s and 80s. One reason was that the network continued to nurture partnerships with singers like Issei Barnwell and Bernice Johnson Reagan, coalition builders who mentored sister singers with honesty and love. In 1990, a meeting with Bernice Johnson Reagan inspired director Catherine Roma to begin a relationship that would help make Muse the most racially diverse chorus in the network and would inspire network choruses for years to come. Reagan encouraged Roma to go beyond repertoire and address the racial and ethnic makeup of the chorus itself. Before long, Roma was ready to put her commitment into action. Next slide. Muse had decided to keep its membership at 48. We didn't want, quote, this is a quote from her, we didn't want to go above 48 because we wanted to be a community. We wanted to know each other and be involved in each other's lives. So we started talking about, well, how do we change ourselves? How do we attract more women of color? How do we reach out? How do we make that change? Since the number of singers was down to 39 at that time, some members suggested that the chorus reserve 7 slots for women of color. Some people, said Catherine, some people were very uncomfortable saying, that's a quota system, you can't do that. And we talked about it. How do we change unless we make space? The decision to allot specific slots to women of color continued to generate controversy. There were some people who didn't want us to do that, recalled Angie Denoff, who had sung with the chorus since its founding. I thought it made the most sense. We would never have filled them if we got to the end of the auditions and just said, well, we didn't have 7 people of color, so we've got to fill it with someone. In 1982, 12 choruses met in Chicago to plan a choral festival to be held in conjunction with the first Gay Games, a brainchild of former Olympic athlete Tom Waddell. That summer, 14 choruses performed at the West Coast Choral Festival, held in conjunction with the Games. And soon afterwards, they founded GALA, the Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses. The following year, the New York City Gay Men's Chorus organized Coast, Come Out and Sing Together, a choral festival featuring 11 gay men's choruses, along with Artemis Singers, Chicago's lesbian chorus. Next slide, please. There they are about that time. The Coast concert notwithstanding, in the early years, gay and lesbian choruses reflected the separate spheres of activism inhabited by the gay men's and lesbian communities. All of that changed in 1981 when the New York Times reported that doctors had diagnosed 41 cases of rare and often rapidly fatal form of cancer among homosexual men in the New York and San Francisco Bay areas. As those of us who lived through those times remember, the early years of the epidemic were devastating to men's choruses, which were often the only place for members to talk about the disease. Meanwhile, lesbian separatists, including those in women's choruses, watched as the medical establishment and the government turned their backs on the suffering of gay men, recognizing a common enemy in the societal homophobia that stigmatized their gay brothers afflicted with the disease. Among the women's choruses responding to the epidemic was Heart Song in Houston, Texas, that had hosted the 1991 Sister Singers Festival. Heart Song had begun as an informal group of friends who sang regularly at an AIDS hospice and at the AIDS wing of a local hospital. And several founders were nurses who witnessed the physical and emotional ravages of the disease firsthand. I was an ICU nurse when all this started, one singer recalled. I remember our first patient that came and was in isolation. Nobody wanted to touch him. One night he was having a really hard time and he was crying. His parents were fundamentalists. So I crawled in bed with him and just held him. I sang to him. I sang lullabies to him, in fact. The music, it just broke the spell of the awfulness and the grief. As the millennium approached, and as antiretroviral therapies brought a decline in the number of AIDS deaths, lesbian and gay activists turned their efforts to wider social and legal issues. Meanwhile, the women's chorus movement was very much alive. Next slide. In 2014, Sister Singers celebrated the 30th anniversary of the first national festival with a gathering in Champaign-Urbana, where singers at the National Women's Music Festival had first shared that mailing list and their vision of the National Women's Chorus Network. Returning to Our Roots featured performances by 7 choruses and a new commission by Boulder composer Andrea Ramsey, Lineage, with a text from a poem by African-American poet Margaret Walker. Next slide. 1 year later, on June 16, 2015, the Supreme Court declared marriage equality the law of the land. During the preceding decade, women's choruses had been at the forefront of the campaign for marriage equality. Dozens of choruses presented concerts with a marriage equality theme, some of which included on-stage commitment ceremonies performed by local lay and religious leaders. Yet even as marriage equality became the law of the land and queer people made their way into the mainstream media, hate crimes and anti-gay initiatives were on the rise. The relationship between visibility and backlash that had characterized gay rights history since the 1970s was nowhere more evident than in the public portrayal of trans Americans. Women's choruses, who had long since abandoned the exclusionary politics of lesbian separatism, responded by reaffirming their commitment to inclusion. Of the 100 plus American choruses listed on the Sister Singers website in 2017, most made no reference to trans identity, focusing instead on the need to match pitch, the importance of regular attendance at rehearsals, and the rewards of joining a community of women singers. Those that did mention trans singers included statements specifically welcoming all women-identified singers. As they turned their attention to trans identity and trans oppression, LGBT choruses also began to focus on the welfare of gay youth. Women and lesbian feminist choruses were careful to avoid any suspicion of recruitment, and discussions could become heated as singers wrestled with the tension between their own need for safety and their desire to support adolescent girls who might be searching for safe spaces. Several women's choruses resolved the conflict by mentoring youth choruses and inviting them to perform in their concerts. Whatever anxieties singers may have felt, the LGBT choral movement has continued to mentor youth choruses and to feature them at GALA festivals. Next slide, please. At the 2016 GALA Festival in Denver, 8 youth choruses performed in a blockbuster concert titled Youth Invasion from Gay to Z. Queer youth were still at risk in their schools, and LGBTQ adults still face discrimination and worse in the wider world. But the sight of 24 gay adolescents celebrating their lives on the gala stage reminded the lesbian and gay singers in the audience, if they needed reminding, of how far their own musical activism had taken them in the struggle for full equality. On January 21st, 2017, the day after the presidential inauguration, millions of women, men, and children from every continent on the planet participated in the Women's March, the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. Women's choruses joined the marchers in their home cities. Some gave impromptu performances. Those who were unable to attend the march pored over Facebook posts and photo essays in newspapers and magazines. One of those who experienced the march through newspaper photos was Ruth Huber, co-artistic director and composer in residence of the Rainbow Women's Chorus of San Jose. The result was a new composition inspired by those images. Huber's description of how she came to write Signs provides an apt finale to this history of women's choruses. The Women's March of January 1st, 2017 was an historic, unprecedented outpouring of nasty women and their friends, united in protest and burgeoning hope for the future. Because Rainbow Women's Chorus had our 20-year anniversary concert that day, I was unable to attend local events, but a friend sent me a link to a photo essay from the New York Times. I spent about 30 minutes perusing images of impassioned women and men, some in pink hats, all carrying an array of cardboard signs. I wrote down the messages that leapt out at me, and their voices began to sing, resulting in Signs, Voices from the Women's March. In these dark times, singing keeps my heart aloft.
join our song. With the whole world watching, our differences are our strengths. No human is illegal. Stay focused and strong. Everybody belongs. We rise. Together we rise. We the people. Nasty women and our friends. We the people. Show up, dive in, persevere to the end. With kindness and generosity, build bridges of hope and liberty. Listen to the wisdom of the First Nations. Climate change is real. Stand up for education. A woman's place is in this revolution. Never surrender. Respect my existence or respect resistance, and keep your mitts off my lady bits. Our rights are not up for grabs, and neither are we. Equality, equality. Girls to the front, time to get information. We're not outraged, paying attention. We rise, place America great. We rise, we the people. We will not. We rise, we the people. Together,
What an amazing piece of music. And you gotta love the San Diego Women's Chorus. It's been such a blessing in my life to have had the opportunity to work with these choruses for the last 13 years and hear them and have them make me cry on a regular basis. But God, we need them now more than ever.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much, Rita. Just a couple of questions here. Can you tell us a little bit about any interactions you've had with folks who have read the book, and does that keep generating more stories for you?
It definitely does. And particularly, the book was published in 2018, and I did a number of signings and trips here and there before we all got locked down. And people like to see themselves, of course, in the book, and that's understandable. And the most heartfelt and heartwarming reaction I've had actually were from the women whose choruses I talked about in the book, because people want their stories to be told. When I first was shopping this book around before I decided to self-publish it, um, one of the reviewers who did not publish it said, "Well, all you're doing here is telling stories." And I thought, right, that's the subtitle of my book. And that is what I'm doing. And so being able to tell these stories and people whose stories I told, or even people who were not in the book but could relate to a lot of the experience that these women had had, just felt very proud and they felt very grateful. I feel very grateful to them, but I've had wonderful reactions. Yeah.
Sure. Are there, given everything going on in the world right now, are there any chapters you would add or revise in the book?
Yes, I would pay attention to and update a lot of what I wrote about race, racism, and relationships among people of women of color and white women. And I would also look at how this book was published in 2018, so my research ended a year or two before that. And so much has changed, not only in the wider world, but within our choruses, in the way we think about our relationships with each other. I would certainly look back at that and write more about it and give, I think, a more nuanced discussion of that. And then, of course, if I were updating it now, I would want to write about how women's choruses are dealing with the current situation, because I think we've been very creative. And at the same time, people feel really sad that they can't sing together in a chorus, because everything in the book, as everything in the book tells you, it means so much. But I would want to find out what ways choruses are finding to stay together. And, I'm on a couple of websites and webinars and stuff like that that's dealing with that. And you, Robin, are the experts.
Well, our women's choruses have always been leaders in the use of music to promote social justice. And I have no doubt that they will lead us through the pandemic and everything else going on in the world today. It is in the nature of women to do that. Tell me a little bit about where you see the future of our women's choruses. If you could look 5 or 10 years out, what do you hope for our women's choruses?
Well, first of all, I hope our women's choruses will be able to sing together in person again, sooner rather than later. But I expect that women's choruses will do what they've done from the beginning, which is to put themselves in the forefront of social justice, social change, helping to empower women, and whatever the issues are going to be, I know women's choruses will be right there out front.
That's terrific. They always have been, and I share your faith that that's where we will be going forward. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Rita. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your book with us. And we look forward to, if God's with us, seeing you in Minneapolis next summer.
As my grandmother would say, from your mouth to God's ears. If I could just put in a little shameless promotion. The book is available on Amazon. And if we're able to be together again, I'd love to come to your course and do more book signings. But in the meantime, it is available online.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this, Robin. I really appreciate it.
You betcha. Good night, folks.